What's up, everybody? Welcome to episode 24 of the Chat It Up podcast. I hope you all had a wonderful Mother's Day yesterday. And a special shout out to all you moms listening in. As always, I'm your host, Shooter, and have a really great episode for you guys today. If this is your first time listening in, Chat It Up is a bi-weekly podcast featuring news, reviews, and interviews about all things Upper Peninsula of Michigan. If you're a return listener, welcome back, and as always, thank you for sticking with me. Now, with the housekeeping out of the way, let's jump into some segments. First off, we've got Youper News, and I have a ton of it this week. My first piece of Youper News is that the Red Bull 400 was on Saturday over in Ironwood. More than 1,000 people competed in this event, which is held at the Copper Peak Ski Flying Facility. And basically, it's a race where you have to run up the entire outrun of the ski hill, and once you do that, you have to run all the way to the top of the Copper Peak ski flying jump, which, if you've never been to Copper Peak, I can just tell you from personal experience, it's really freaking high and kind of scary. So definitely not an easy challenge for anybody, but a huge shout out to everyone who helped make that event happen for the second year in a row. Pretty cool collaboration with Red Bull, a pretty big worldwide company. So shout out to everybody that not only made it happen, but also everybody that competed. My second piece of Youper News is also from Saturday. The 2019 class of the UP Sports Hall of Fame was inducted in a ceremony over at the Island Resort and Casino over in Bark River. The inductees this year were Jerry Bugney, Marmaduke Duke Christie, Fran Desarmo, Dave Duncan, Jeff Finger, Chris Hofer, Todd Lindemann, Joseph Linder, Fred Lonsdorf, and Bob Olson. So, I could probably do an episode on each one of those people individually for all the great things that they've done in the world of sports, and every single one of them is a Youper. So, a huge tip of the cap to all of them, as it's an incredible honor to be inducted into that UP Sports Hall of Fame. The next piece of news that I have coming up is this Thursday the 16th, there's going to be an event at Ampersand Co-working Space that's hosted by Innovate Marquette from noon to 1 p.m. And Casey Phillips and this week's podcast guest, Keith Glendon, they'll be presenting on artificial intelligence and how technology is presenting new economic opportunities for the UP, which sounds like a really super interesting discussion and some of what Keith and I are discussing in this week's interview. So if you're in the Marquette area, on Thursday, stop into Ampersand and check it out, because like I said, it should be a really cool discussion. My last piece of Youper news for this week is the Way Up Music Festival, which is going to be held at Lakeview Arena in Marquette on Friday and Saturday, May 24th and 25th. Double Trouble DJs is putting this event on, and if there's one thing that I know from experience, it's that Double Trouble DJs throw one hell of a party. So huge shout out to Pat and Bill Dignite. Those are my guys. Those are my buddies. So this festival they're putting on looks to have an incredible lineup. Afro Man, he's known worldwide for because the song "Because I Got High." He's going to be there. There's a Tom Petty tribute band, a Spice Girls tribute band. I saw the band Gizeh, the old reggae band that some of you might remember from the old Upfront days, is going to be there, plus a whole lot more. There really looks like there's a little something for everyone, depending on what your music tastes are. So stop down there to Lakeview Arena this weekend and check it out. If you want more info, they do have a website. It's wayupmusicfestival.com. So that's it this week for Youper News. All right, that means it's time for This Day in Youper History, which is brought to you by the folks over at pasty.com. That's pasty.com, and the Pasty Central Facebook page. So here it is, May 13th, This Day in Youper History.
Pasty Central Day in History, May 13th. May 13th is noteworthy for Sandpoint Lighthouse, located in Ludington Park at Escanaba on the north shore of Lake Michigan. The lighthouse opened with one of the first women lighthouse keepers on the Great Lakes, Mary Terry, Her husband John had been appointed the first lightkeeper, but he died of consumption while the lighthouse was under construction. On this day in 1868, lightkeeper Mary climbed the brick tower of Sand Point to the cast iron lantern room and lit the fixed red signal for Escanaba's harbor. 9 keepers and their families kept the light shining over the bay until 1939, when the United States Coast Guard took over all navigational lights in the country from the National Lighthouse Service. Pasty Central Day in History, May 13th.
Once again, a big thank you to the folks at Pasty.com and the Pasty Central Facebook page for this day in Yooper history. All right, it's time for this week's interview, which is with Mr. Keith Glendon. I've been wanting to meet Keith for a while, and in all honesty, I'm surprised it took us this long to meet, because since my time that I've been in Marquette, we've kind of ran in similar circles, and, well, in any case, he's definitely a thought leader for the Upper Peninsula on technology and the economic benefits that come with it. But you know what, per usual, I'm going to let him tell his own story. So, without further ado, let's chat it up. All right, ladies and gentlemen, I'm sitting down here with Mr. Keith Glendon. Keith, thank you for coming onto the podcast. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Yeah, so we'll just kind of jump into things here. So you're born and raised right here in Marquette. What was life like for you growing up here?
It was pretty cool. I'll correct the born part because I was born in Ann Arbor.
Oh, okay.
And I don't want to lay claim to being born here, but
All right,
but I was
enough.
brought to the Upper Peninsula when I was just a wee child. I think I was about 8 or 9 months old. But so I grew up here.
Sure.
Spent most of my childhood here. I did spend some summers downstate, when my parents separated later in life. But what was it like growing up here? It was a small town. It still is, but it was a small town back then, and it's changed an awful lot. But it was, your typical late 70s, early 80s childhood of free-range childhood and
free range. I like that.
BMX bikes and being gone till dark and playing Ghost in the Boneyard and Kick the Can and going fishing and cops and robbers and all sorts of things that are probably not PC anymore.
Right.
And getting into sorts of mischief that kids aren't allowed to get into anymore.
Right.
It was a great place to grow up.
So you kind of alluded to a little bit. Obviously, Marquette looks a lot different than it did back then. Some might say for better, some might say for worse. What's your take on kind of the development that you've seen?
Yeah, I mean, I don't call it for better or for worse. I mean, it is what it is. It's progressed, we can all look at our hometowns and go, well, it's not what it used to be. Mm-hmm. And I certainly have those days where I'm like, oh man, this is some sort of terrible loss. But the reality is that human beings change things and we evolve things, and I mean altogether I think it's still a fantastic place.
Sure.
I find that the development, in my opinion, the development has become a little bit lopsided, and we've done a great job of becoming all of the things that the outside world sees us as.
Yes.
We've done a great job of becoming the lists, the top 10 lists of great places to fill in the blank.
Yeah.
But at the same time, you look at some of what life used to be that made Marquette the charming Marquette that people wanted to come see. And when you peel back what that really was and the type of people that was founded on or built on, and realize that in a lot of cases those folks are now not able to live here and have to move out to outlying areas or up to Ishpeming or Negaunee. Not that there's anything wrong with those places, but it's this dynamic that happens time and again in destination towns. Sure. Where suddenly you've got this really heavy base of service economy, and the service workers can't afford to live in that economy. And I see that happening. And I grew up in the days when K.I. Sawyer was thriving, and it was a military base. And, there were probably 10, 12,000 people out there. Yeah. And and the economy that brought, and the B-52s flying over every day, screeching over.
Sure.
And now K.I. Sawyer is, it's not what it used to be.
Yeah.
And it's, in some ways, it's a sad thing. A lot of potential there. So I don't know. There's, like you said, there's good and bad.
Mm-hmm. I mean, you mentioned the military base. You yourself, did you join the military right out of high school, or did you join the Army? Am I understanding that correctly?
I joined the Army in 91, 92. And 91? I can't remember. It was 91 or 92.
Okay.
And it was, I dropped out of high school.
Okay.
And I took a year off roughly and worked and got my GED, and then I went to Washtenaw Community College. Mm-hmm. And then I transferred back to Northern.
Okay.
And went to Northern for 2 semesters, and then kind of blew those semesters. I was academically and intellectually ready for college, but not so much maybe psychologically and emotionally. And
a lot of Wildcat days?
Socially. It was Wildcats. Yeah, there was probably too much Wildcat in
Wildcat days.
So I joined the Army because my financial backers were no longer backing my education. And at the time, I was 19 and prone to fall victim to certain patriotism. And at that time, First Gulf War had just ended.
Yeah.
There was a lot of that happen, a lot of hype around that. And as a young man, it seemed like a good way to pay for my education.
Sure.
Yeah.
So, well, first of all, thank you for your service. But when it's my understanding, you were stationed over in Germany.
Germany, yeah, Kaiserslautern.
So is that a pretty big culture shock? I mean,
it was cool. I mean, it didn't really. I didn't find it a culture shock. I embraced it as a cultural, opportunity. Mm-hmm. And in fact, a lot of folks lived on bases over there, and I lived off base.
Cool.
On the economy, they call it.
Yeah, very cool.
Smallest part of Kaiserslautern I could find, in a little tiny German apartment, and it was great. I mean, I had entered the military with on a contract to be a ranger.
Okay.
And fortunately for me, I got injured in jump school and was sent to retrain, which was, you take a couple of weeks to get healthy again, and then they send you back into the cycle. But 2 weeks into that cycle, they sent me on orders to Germany.
Okay.
Which, at the time I was a little disappointed, but in retrospect, it probably was exactly the right thing for me. Because if I'd gone to Ranger School and I would have been a different person.
Sure.
So as it was, I got to spend 3 years in Europe, and I was working as a commo guy for a military police company, which meant I had my weekends off most of the time, and there was no conflict really on at the time. Somalia, Bosnia, we had a couple of small deployments, but for the most part, it was just rear echelon, Monday through Friday, 9 to 5, weekends off in Europe. so that was cool. I had a really good time in the military for that.
So when you finished that up, I know you came back to Northern, correct?
Yes.
After that?
Yeah.
So was it just like an automatic coming back this way because this is home, or was there something that really truly kind of led you back to Marquette?
I think it was indecision, and Marquette was kind of, in a way, the easiest, and it was also home.
Yeah.
I could have gone anywhere, because when you get out of the military, you go in-state tuition.
I was going to ask that, because really you could technically go anywhere.
You could go anywhere, and I guess I've never really questioned deeply why I chose Marquette. I mean, my wife at the time was from Michigan, and we were both comfortable with Northern, had both gone to Northern prior to us getting married and going to Europe. So I think it was partly that we'd established some time here, but also we love Marquette, and it was a great place to come back to.
And so when you came back, you ended up getting your bachelor's in business and computer info systems, right?
It was sort of a combined major thing that they'd come up with, business and computer information systems.
Okay. And I know that while you were doing that, you kind of were working for an upstart here. Well, it's not an upstart anymore, but at the time it was an upstart, which is Northern Initiatives. Can you talk a little bit to that experience?
Yeah, and actually I was working for an upstart that contracted to them. So,
okay.
So it was even more of an upstart than that.
Yeah.
There was a guy, Jeff Blackman, had graduated a couple years ahead of me, and he started a computer consulting firm here in town.
Sure.
And I went to work for Jeff, and there was a couple of things that I was contracted out to do. One, I was doing continuing ed classes at Northern.
Oh, okay.
So we would teach computer classes at NMU for the continuing education department. That was kind of cool. And then the other one was we had landed a contract with Northern Initiatives. And at the time, they had about, 30 or 40 employees downtown.
Yeah.
And a small network of Novell and Apple and, a couple of servers and some real basic stuff.
Yeah.
But I became their kind of jack of all trades IT guy and was able to practice hands-on IT while I was learning business and computer information systems.
Did you always have an interest in like computers and the technology, or was it more so something that you had like a foresight of? I mean, because the timing of this, it's not like we had really hit the boom yet, so to speak, for a lack of a better term. But
yeah, it was. It's interesting. I mean, I always liked technology, and I'd been exposed to computers in elementary school here and there. I did a little coding in elementary school when they introduced us to BASIC. And I liked video games, the ones I'd been exposed to, on Apple's, the old school, like role-playing games.
Yep.
But I hadn't had a lot of technology exposure.
Okay.
What really did it was when I graduated, or when I left the military, I wasn't quite sure still what I wanted to do. I'd taken a lot of classes in psychology.
Oh, okay.
And I had been in theater, and when I was in the military, I was going to the University of Maryland overseas for psychology. But I just kind of was looking around going, do I really want to do clinical psychology, and is this what I want my career to be about? I didn't know, and I could see the internet was about to happen at the time. The World Wide Web was just coming out.
Right.
The internet had been around, but the World Wide Web was just coming out. I had read this book called Neuromancer, which was an 80s sci-fi book that was sort of future-looking, and it was a book about hackers, but future-looking. And that intrigued me, and I knew business was probably I would always find work in business, and so a degree that combined the two of those things was interesting to me.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And the part that really intrigues me about that is the Upper Peninsula, not even just Marquette, but the Upper Peninsula at large. When you think of this place we call home, you don't necessarily think of it as a tech hub or a place where you're, like you said, where you're exposed to a lot of that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
So to kind of have a little bit of foresight, whether it be from a book or whatever, I don't know. It's just, I find that super interesting. But so when you finished college, I guess, how did the opportunity to work for IBM come together? Because I mean, that's a huge opportunity.
Yeah, it was, and it was a stroke of luck, really. I mean, it was a stroke of luck, and it was also Northern. It was being involved with Northern at a school where it's small enough that I was very close to my faculty.
Sure.
I was able to be involved in a student panel or a student, almost like a committee. I can't remember what it was called now. But there was a student advisory committee on the College of Business, and then with that committee, once a quarter or something, we would get together with employers and hear from them, like what did they need in people they were hiring.
Sure. And
the university would hear from them also sort of what types of things they ought to be doing with their curriculum.
Yeah.
And students got an experience to be able to interact with industry folks to get a better understanding of what jobs were like and things like that.
Sure.
So I had gone to an event in Minneapolis with that advisory committee, and the event had been organized by an IBMer, and I was getting close to my graduation. I had an interview already scheduled with Anderson Consulting, And at that event, the guy that organized it, the IBM guy, he took me aside at lunch and he said, "What are you doing after school?" And I guess he had been impressed with the questions I was asking and things I was saying. And
Sure.
I told him, "Well, I'm going to be interviewing with Anderson. I'm not really sure what I want to do." And he said, "No, you don't want to work for Anderson. You should come work for IBM." And long story short, I did wind up with them. I interviewed with both those companies and a couple of others, but IBM was definitely a company that had big prospects and really interesting stuff that I could do, and they had taken a lot more time to understand me in the process, whereas Anderson had this intake where it was very regimented. You're going to be a code monkey for 2 years, and then when you're done with that, you get to do this, and then you start to build your career. Whereas IBM, from the very get-go, was, what do you want to do with your career, and they helped me find my niche very quickly.
So, what was your niche then?
Well, I wound up in networking, and it was really my first job with them was a network specialist, network consultant. And I didn't know an awful lot about networking yet, but I had been studying on my own and learned a lot at Northern Initiatives, and I was involved in we had the contract to deploy the very first cable modems in Marquette, which were the very first cable modems in the United States.
Wow.
They test piloted them in Marquette because it turns out you can pilot things in Marquette, and if it goes horribly wrong, nobody ever knows. So,
that's really interesting.
Yeah, but Marquette had a really, we were seen as a market that had this very vanilla cross section of people. So they could get good feedback. And anyway, I learned a lot about networking, and I was intrigued by networking because having grown up here, I could see where everything was going with the internet, with networking, and to me, it wasn't networking itself as a technology wasn't exciting.
Yeah.
It was what was going to happen to our society that was exciting. And even in my interview, I remember telling this one manager, I look at the internet as networking people and ideas, and knowledge, not bits and bytes and gear. It's bringing us together as a species in really interesting ways. So I spent the first few years at IBM in that field, doing network consulting.
That's a really great perspective that you have on it, which is one that I wouldn't typically myself lean towards. How did that evolve then over time for you? What did that transition, like for your own kind of path with them, how did that change, I guess?
Yeah, it's been a long career, and I've done a lot of cool things with IBM over the years, and a lot of the jobs that I've had or career moves I've made haven't existed until I kind of created them with somebody else at IBM. But I was working in networking for a few years. That led to something called systems management because I was really more interested in kind of the big picture. How are companies using technology for business value? And how did you manage these big infrastructures in ways that would be beneficial to them? So I moved away from networking into systems management. That led into something that was called autonomic computing.
Yeah.
Self-healing systems. I was an autonomic computing architect for a few years. And then e-business started happening. That was a big buzzword.
Yeah, I had that kind of listed here.
Yeah,
e-business
I took a job out in Santa Monica at our e-business, one of 8 e-business innovation centers, which was this hub of where we were helping companies figure out how to conduct commerce on the internet. The early days of, it's almost hard to realize or to wrap your head around the fact that it was only like 15 years ago. There was no Amazon.
No.
And there was people weren't really shopping online yet.
Right.
We were trying to help everyone figure that out. So it's just gone crazy in a very short space of time.
Yeah.
So I did that for a while, and I left IBM for a couple of years and started an outsourcing business with France Telecom. I helped them build a North American outsourcing business for their network business. They came back to IBM as a principal in strategy and systems management, and did some data center builds, and then decided to move to New Zealand.
Wow.
And, so I quit my job with IBM and moved to New Zealand and worked with some other IBMers that I knew to get a job over there.
Okay.
And then I wound up running Asia Pacific a division of our services or business for Asia Pacific for 4 or 5 years. And then came back here because I decided I wanted to, by that time I had 2 daughters and wanted to raise them in the UP. So came back here to...
Yeah, that was right around 2010,
2010,
right?
yeah.
Yeah, and that was kind of my next thing I was going to lead into. So what is it about here that made you want to raise your daughters here?
Well, first of all, family. You know, I mean, my mom lives here. My stepfather lives here. My dad and his wife at the time, who's now deceased, was living in Manistee, and so
okay.
You know, it was being close to family. When you're 15,000 miles from family with a couple of little kids, it's hard.
Yeah.
But it's also the idea that, you know, I've been around the world a lot and been to cities, and I've been to lots of different countries, and you know. Having now seen the world, as a kid I wanted to get out and see the world.
Right.
But now having seen it, I'm kind of like, this has actually got a lot of everything that you want and need all in one little condensed place.
Yeah.
And what better place to raise children, you know?
Yeah, I agree completely. And that was going to be one of my questions for you is, you know, you've been around the world, like you said, you lived in New Zealand and throughout Asia or the Asian Pacific, and then you come back to Marquette.
Yeah.
What were some of the big things that jumped out at you when you kind of got back here? I mean,
well, I mean, honestly, it jumped out at me that I don't like snow as much as I used to, having lived for about 10 years in coastal regions. Yes. Where it was like 80 degrees year round. Yeah. Well, okay, so sometimes it would get colder than that, but where you could pretty much wear shorts and sandals.
Sure.
And where the ocean was down the street.
Yeah.
That was, I got spoiled, you know. And at this life stage, with 4 kids and a job and everything, snow is kind of a heartache. So that was a pain. But what jumps out at me still is the fact that, you know, I can get up and go fishing and go to work and work a full day and then get done with fishing or get done with my work day and go for a mountain bike ride with my kids. And all that happens in one day. Whereas in California, I couldn't do that.
Right.
You know, you'd get up, and maybe you have to spend 2.5 hours in traffic to get somewhere for meetings all day, and then you get home at 9:30 at night. And sure, it's beautiful, but you're stressed out, and you're surrounded by traffic, and you'd never even got to get to the ocean that day.
Sure.
And if you want to go skiing, it's a 4-hour drive the other way, and you know, so it's just kind of there are plenty of places that have grand, amazing things that are bigger and more amazing than Marquette. But what's unique about this place is that we have so much of it all in one little spot that you can really do things in one day, and you don't have to feel the overwhelm of the pace of life in many other places in the world.
It's interesting. I would agree with you completely, but it's interesting I just think of the word accessibility.
Yeah.
is really the best way that I think of that.
Yeah, and it's ironic because a lot of folks, you know, the hang-up is, well, Marquette isn't accessible. It's so remote.
Right?
Well, but some of the best places in the world are remote places that still have everything you need.
Right.
You know?
So with your transition kind of moving back here, and you know, you mentioned at the time, you know, your 2 girls, now you're a father of 4, correct?
Yeah,
so you've got 4 kids. It seems like with your return back here, a lot of your efforts have been focused on youth or contributing back in a lot of different ways. One of which is, I know that you're pretty active on the Marquette Public School Board.
Yeah.
What kind of motivated you to get involved with that?
Well, I mean, it's like we talked about earlier before the podcast. My mom was an educator, and so I was raised by a teacher.
Yep.
I had thought about being a teacher, but having watched my parent, you know, be a teacher, I've kind of gone, I don't know if I can deal with that career. I love the idea of teaching and working with kids, but not a lot of the other parts of it.
Sure.
And I don't know. I mean, I didn't come back here with any intention of getting involved with the schools. But I've, over the years, have done a lot of volunteer work with youth groups.
Sure.
I think that giving back to children is super important, really rewarding. Probably ties back to things that, you know, when I was a kid, when you grow up, you realize the things that you look back on your life and go, well, here's some things that would have made a difference in my life, and then you want to kind of reach out and give that to others.
Absolutely.
To make the world a better place. But it really came down, I think it really came to a head when I was, it was a parent-teacher conference one year when Kieran, my older daughter, was first going to school.
Okay.
And a teacher had highlighted, she found out that I worked for IBM, and she said, well, look at all this great technology we have. We had just gotten the one-to-one initiative approved in Marquette. So every kid had a computer, and there was a bunch of new cool gear in all the classrooms. And I said, well, that's great. What are you doing with this stuff? What are you teaching? And I was sort of excited to learn. What are they doing with all this technology? And it was kind of we've got these iPads, and they have, a writing app and a math app and a reading app. And it was very quickly you could see that there was great equipment, but there hadn't been curriculum change that really embraced technology. And these kids were learning, 18th century topics on 21st century platforms, but not understanding how to use those platforms, in ways that really mirror what the world needs.
Right.
And at about the same time, I was kind of back in my head about starting businesses, because I've always been kind of entrepreneurial, and how could we build more here for our economy and for our kids. And it just struck me that if we were ever going to be successful in building that kind of a sector in our economy, and if we were going to empower our kids for the world they're going to live in, that we needed to start with the kids. We needed to start.
Well, yeah.
We needed to start planting the seeds.
Sure.
And so, rather than try to start some businesses that I had in mind at the time, I thought, well, I'm going to start by planting those seeds, and I started a coding club for kids.
Yeah, the Coder Dojo.
Coder Dojo.
Yeah.
And it was an interesting, because shortly after that experience at the parent-teacher thing, I had it in my mind that I wanted to do something, and I went to this big conference that I go to every year, and they were talking about self-driving cars, and they were talking about quantum computing, and they were talking about augmented reality and all that was going to do. And I'm thinking, how on earth are our children going to cope with that if they have no clue? They got to wait till college to learn this stuff.
Right.
And it was at that conference that I made a connection with an IBMer who helped start Coder Dojo. Okay. Which is why I thought, well, this is perfect, and I went and started that up. So the coding club thing came first, and then through that, I started working with children ages 5 to high school, and really understanding what we were and weren't doing in the schools, and hearing from those kids, and seeing how excited they were, and hearing from teachers that didn't feel comfortable using the tools available to them, and using even free open source things that they could get on the internet to teach kids to code, for example. They just hadn't had enough professional development, and so that got me thinking, well, somebody should probably be an advocate on the school board, and an opportunity came up to run. One of the trustees had needed to step down early in a term. And there was an appointment available, so I thought, well, why not? And the rest is history. As
if not you, then who?
Right. So it was. I didn't know whether that was. It's funny because being a high school dropout.
Right.
here I was presenting myself as a. But I think that's pretty cool too, because in the 2.5, 3 years that I've been on the board, there's been several occasions where I've felt. I'm bringing a perspective of a kid who didn't feel his needs were being met by this district.
Sure.
Who tried some things to try and get the district to meet his needs, and it didn't work, and so dropped out.
Sure.
And that's kind of a unique perspective when you come.
It definitely is.
To say like, hey, wait a minute, let's look at how we are and aren't meeting the needs of our students even today. Today we're doing some great stuff. I mean, if there were even half the resources, back then that we have in this district today, I probably would have made it. I probably would have found my way. But it was a different time, 25 years, 30 years ago.
Well, and that just speaks to what you were talking about before, though, when you look back on your childhood and you say, well, what were some things that I could have benefited from?
Yeah.
And you're really facilitating that.
Yeah.
So that's pretty special.
Yeah.
Can you talk a little bit about the UP Cybersecurity Institute? I know that kind of has snowballed from the Coder Dojo, and really you're kind of almost like an alliance between Northern and IBM and what you've been doing, which is really, really cool.
Yeah. That so that was it was an evolution. I was starting to see that kids. Coder Dojo ran for about 6 years, and in that time, hundreds of kids, participated in our programs, and those kids went back to schools and brought with them the things that they had learned.
Sure.
Excitedly sharing with their peers, with their teachers. That helped to raise awareness. At the same time, the Seaborg Center and Marisa were doing some things in the schools that were helping to elevate and amplify that sort of thing. So we got to this point where most schools had some level of base awareness of coding.
Sure.
And most schools were doing some Coder Dojo-like stuff, either in clubs or special activities.
Okay.
And so I was thinking about how do we evolve that. There's this sort of intro level out there. And rather than try and boil the ocean with regard to computer science, it's a very broad set of fields.
Right.
How can I use the fact that I'm really focused on cybersecurity, and by the way, that's a huge growing need.
Yeah.
Huge. I mean, there's it's write your own ticket kind of stuff for the next several years when it comes to having these skills, because there's just such a shortage of people and such an incredible demand for cybersecurity and security skills. And as I was looking at that and thinking, well, how do I do something a little more advanced and offer some sort of new opportunity for kids to get into those fields, there came an opportunity through the MEDC and the Merit Network to put in a proposal to bring a cyber range hub here to Marquette. Sure. So I started scheming with Dave Nyberg at the university, who had just taken his job.
Oh, great! Shout out to Dave. He's been on the podcast before.
Yeah. So he was, I think he probably hadn't even formally announced his new role when he and I first started hatching this scheme.
Sure.
And thankfully he was all in, and so was Steve Vandenhoven, the VP of Extended Learning over there. Mm-hmm. And to NMU's credit, they jumped right into this, and we put a lot of effort into writing a proposal, winning that proposal, getting designated as a cyber range hub in the Michigan Cyber Range, and then building a consortium of 21 school districts and 3 colleges, universities, and probably about 15 or 20 industry partners, and then a whole bunch of community organizations and EDOs that all signed on to this cybersecurity consortium as part of the Marshall Plan, because now we have the hub and the institute is here.
Sure.
And behind that, we want to fund a bunch of programs that can act as sort of a ecosystem to funnel kids from K-12 and empower them with the right fundamental skills along the way through high school curriculum and in-school activities, that by the time they get to a middle college, they can sign up for the middle college or come to the cyber university and get credentialed, and sort of fast path into these careers.
Right.
And it's the kind of thing where, college still is a great thing if you know that you want to be a doctor or a veterinarian, or your heart is set on being a statistician of some sort that, can't say enough for pursuing the college path. But then there's a lot of other things where, I know I want to go to college, but I don't know if I want to incur all these debts.
Right.
And there's new paths in this world today where we've got teenage millionaires who have created apps in their basement, and,
sure.
and we've got Twitch streamers who are making a bunch of money and paying for college by doing stuff on YouTube or Twitch, and so similarly, there are skills that you can learn in high school that by the time you graduate high school, you can make a good living.
Absolutely.
As a part-time hacker, or a part-time cybersecurity person, if you've got the skills, and you can use that income to pay for college, or maybe not go to college for a while, or maybe never, right?
Right.
So it's a different world that's being presented to youth today, And there's different building blocks that they could use to be successful in that world. So cyber is just one of those areas where we can really focus as a community and as an ecosystem to show not only kids, but transitioning veterans coming back to the civilian world.
Sure.
People that I've got several folks here in town that I've talked to who are in careers that they don't like and are interested in technology and want to get into cybersecurity. And that's the kind of thing where you can be a career civil engineer or a career insurance salesman or whatever, fill in the blank and go like, I don't want to do this anymore, and I'm going to spend some time, nights and weekends, learning this exciting stuff and change my career, and then go, take my family on the road and live in an RV and travel around as a full-time family and work 20 hours a week as a cyber expert.
Sure.
I mean, there's all kinds of possibilities.
Yeah, I mean, it really sounds like the sky's the limit.
Yeah.
So, I know that you recently spoke to the Econ Club here in Marquette.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of what you and I have talked about, I assume, was kind of the gist of what you were talking about, or can you elaborate a little bit more on what that presentation was really about?
Yeah, so that presentation was my first public sort of gauntlet, right? To go, hey, why not, right? Why not here?
Right.
Why not have, and I kind of went through a number of themes that are happening in the world today.
Sure.
And I looked at artificial intelligence, virtual reality, cloud computing, AI, robotics, cybersecurity, and 5G. And when you look at those major technology themes,
right,
and what is happening in the world because of those major technology themes, you start to understand that Marquette has everything we need to have a really vibrant tech economy. We've got this great little town that people want to be in. Mm-hmm. We've got a place where you can have quality of life, where it's lower cost of living. There are people in places like Silicon Valley and Austin and Boston and you name it that are tired of living in those places, that can't afford to live in those places, that don't need to be the next billionaire, but want a place to raise a family and to apply their entrepreneurial spirit in the new tech economy.
Sure.
And there is no reason we shouldn't be able to do that here. And so I talked to the audience about those themes, the impact that they're having, the orders of magnitude larger markets we're talking about than, if you look at AI and cloud computing, just as two individual sort of themes, it's like $1 trillion of marketplace right now. The global market is in the trillions. If you look at the global mining market, nothing against mining, but if you look at, just to compare the two, it's like 500 billion or something. So orders of magnitude larger potential, in terms of the market space that we have, the addressable market for these industries, and yet we're not really paying them attention. Mm-hmm. And we, and this is a general statement, but we as a community kind of tend to go, well, that's not relevant here,
I would agree, yeah.
It's somewhere else. It's Silicon Valley.
Right.
But it's not. Every business is a tech business now. Every life is a tech life.
It needs to be pretty much.
So,
yeah.
I mean, you can't separate tech from human life anymore.
Correct.
And unless you go to an extreme and you're living completely off the grid, and great, but that's less and less reality in our world.
Yeah.
So my point was, it was sort of a call to action. Hey, let's engage this community in a conversation around raising the awareness of the possible and recognizing what's already happening here. We've got hundreds of tech workers that work from home for companies that are global or national or out of Marquette. Mm-hmm. We've got tech companies that have started here. We've got a lot of design firms who work in the tech space.
Sure.
We've got individual small companies. We've got virtual reality companies who have launched here and gone to Silicon Valley, who have moved back here. And so let's tell the story more loudly about what's already happening, because it's not just we could do this. We're already doing it. So let's celebrate it more, and let's get it out there, and let's say, hey, you know what? Marquette is on the top 10 of tech towns too.
Yeah.
Why not be on that list?
I couldn't agree with you more. A question kind of curving off of that is, what would you say your biggest concern is with all of this? I mean, for me, based on what you've kind of been telling me, I kind of worry about finding a balance between obviously growing technology and kind of keeping up with the times, but I also would hate to take away from what you talked about earlier of like that charm that Marquette has, and I think still has.
Yeah.
That's when I listen to you talk. That's my biggest concern. But I guess what would your biggest concern be with that?
Well,
forward?
I mean, I guess I'm being very pragmatic about it. That charm isn't going to. One way or another, Marquette's not going to remain the Marquette that we know.
That's
the one
true.
that we look out and see right now is going to be different in 10 years, in 20 years, in 30 years. And what we do now is going to shape it. So the direction that I feel like we're going in very heavily is one that is likely to shape Marquette into the same kind of template that a lot of destination towns get shaped into. In other words, first comes a predominance of either condos or high-end homes that maybe aren't full-time residents. And along with that comes less and less families, and so the schools get less and less funding because funding is associated with how many students you actually have.
Right.
People who do have young families are forced to move out of the district, so that further erodes the schools, which then further erodes people wanting to be in there. So your school district kind of falls down, and bit by bit, gradually, it becomes this unsustainable. The community, the charm that was there once, is not sustainable anymore, and it becomes a McTown. It's still beautiful.
I like that term, McTown.
It's an unfortunate reality. If you go to any destination community that was once a charming town, people move there and and then they bring the things that they wanted from the other place, that they turn it into the other stuff, and that's maybe it's human nature. But so I guess to your question. I feel like it's going to change anyway. And one thing that we can do to try and preserve our way of life, whatever we consider that, right, is to create opportunities for the families that live here, the community that lives here to live on, to create a future for the community, not just for a few sectors of that community.
Sure.
And I think that it's really important that we look at kind of the notion of balance. Think about it as a pie. I like pie.
Who doesn't?
Who doesn't like pie? And you think about the wedges of your pie, right?
Yeah.
And just look at it like, okay, how big is our tourist wedge? How big is our mining wedge? How big is our healthcare wedge? All right, let's just look at this in balance. How big is the wedge of exports of our youth? That's our biggest export, I think. Behind iron ore and wood,
natural resources.
It's children is our biggest export, and how is that sustainable for our way of life, whatever you consider it, for our community?
Sure. It's an interesting thing to think about.
So I don't know. I think it's kind of I think it helps us sustain whatever it is we are, and it helps us create a more balanced future for our community.
Sure.
To really look at how we can take advantage of major economic drivers.
Yeah. So I noticed your shirt says Lucid Coast.
Yeah.
So what is Lucid Coast? I'm interested because this isn't something that I'm aware of.
Yeah, it's a company that I founded,
Okay.
and at this point, it's really just myself and a group of folks who have thrown in, their intent to create something, right? And we're still in the process of defining that.
Okay.
But ultimately, we're a technology and innovation company aimed at helping companies embrace new economy technologies.
Sure.
and helping do that in balance and in strategic ways to grow your business, to improve your business,
Sure.
or your community in a secure way. As we see that more and more of life is transacted on the internet.
Yeah.
The foundation of security is super important. And so Lucid Coast is just it's a name that I made up for the company, and,
Sure.
and it kind of evokes the clarity that I find in my mind when I'm here on the north coast of Michigan.
Sure.
The lucidity that comes with that. I think it's a great place for us to found a tech company that helps others get that clarity for their business.
I like it.
Yeah.
So we've hit every single box that I had checked. Is there anything that I left out, or anything else that you'd want to add or kind of touch on? Or
No, I mean, I wasn't quite sure what to expect, honestly, so this has been good. It's been interesting, and I appreciate the time and the questioning, and, I guess the only thing I would add is that in order for us to have a successful, thriving tech economy or any other sector,
sure,
we as a community need to kind of make this collective decision that we're going to intend it. Whether you believe in the law of attraction or any of that stuff, human beings are creators, and that's just in our nature. And the first step in creating something is deciding we're going to, or not, implicitly deciding it by ignoring. But we've been very good in this community at coming together behind certain ideas and then making that happen. And the idea of a tech economy maybe isn't as exciting as some things, but it's even things like this. We're in the running for a spaceport, and people kind of blow that off and go, that'll never happen. It won't happen here. It'll go somewhere else. It'll be a nuisance. We can't have that. But on the other hand, what about the possibilities?
Why not?
And why not? and there's going to be a spaceport somewhere, and even our legacy of mining culture, right? Mining is moving to space. That's why these low Earth orbit things are important, because all the big companies and the Denver School of Mining, and they're all looking at how do we start to mine asteroids, because we're using up the resources on this planet.
Sure.
And one way we might preserve this planet and our way of life as a species might be to go and look off this planet for resources. And and that's a long game, but in the short term, we're talking about 1,000 new jobs, $8 million in revenue to the local economy every year. Revitalizing K.I. Sawyer, improving the infrastructure of the airport there and access, to and from the UP. Sure, it's scary, but is it also not scary to think about maybe 10 years from now? There's nothing but condos along the lake shore, and nobody can afford to live here anymore, and we got lots of cool breweries, and the schools are shut. And so I think as a community we need to be willing to talk about new economy opportunities and decide on a few and then get excited about them. And so I guess that would be the only thing else that I wanted to add, is inviting a call to action, right? To invite people into these conversations and going to the Bites with Bugsies and understanding what is this technology stuff all about, and going to the New Economy series and the AI series next week, and it'll probably be in the past by the time this airs, but the Cybersecurity Roundtable later in June. There's stuff happening, it's about engaging with that and recognizing that technology touches us all. It's a genie that's not going back in the bottle. It's not. Human beings we never put fire away, we never put the wheel away, and we're not going to put AI and all this other technology back in the bottle. We won't. So we all collectively need to decide what we want to become with it.
I agree with you completely, and I really appreciate your insight on all of this. So my one final question then, and it's funny because you don't even know what my last question is, because you told me that you didn't listen to the podcast. So my final question for every single person is, how do you like your pasty?
How do I like my pasty? I like my pasty with the top cut off, ketchup, pour it inside, and then I mix it all up.
Okay.
And then I eat the pasty, insides first, a little bit of pasty left in the crust, and then I pick up and eat the crust with the pasty in it, and the last thing I eat is the top.
Oh, okay, so you save the top for the end.
Save the lid for the end with ketchup all over it.
But you're a ketchup guy.
I'm a ketchup guy.
I've had very interesting answers, with every interview that I've had. So once again, Keith, I just want to thank you for sitting down with me. As I mentioned, I really appreciate your perspective, and I think that conversations like this are important and need to be had, and people need to hear them. So again, I really appreciate you sitting down and taking the time to talk with me.
I appreciate it also, and I guess you're a writer. I noticed I recently picked up your book.
Yeah.
So I'll throw in a little plug for my blog, gooderwithbigness.com. And that's where you can also preview my children's book that I'm writing, and that Katie Jo Wright is the illustrator for.
Oh, awesome.
And we're it's slow going.
Okay.
Very slow going.
Sure.
But
I know the process all too well.
But we continue to envision that and chip away at it, and creativity and writing and getting something out there in the world is cool and important, and Wise for Youper is a great example.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that. So you said it was gooderwithbigness.com?
Gooderwithbigness.com.
All right, cool. Well, again, thank you, Keith, for coming on the podcast. I really appreciate it.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Okay, it's time for the takeaways from my chat with Keith. The first is, the path to success is never a straight line. And I think Keith's story is a prime example of that. He went from dropping out of high school to college, to the military, back to college, to climbing the ranks at IBM, to coming back to the UP to raise his family. And so often, I feel like people think you have to follow exact steps in order to, quote unquote, make it in this world. Almost as if you have to go and get a 4-year degree, and then you can get married, and then you can start a family, and boom, then you've made it. But really, guess what? The majority of the time, life has other plans. I mean, there's technical schools, there's 2-year degrees, there's apprenticeship, there's the military, I mean, you name it. One path does not fit all. So if anything, I feel like Keith's story has taught me to stay true to yourself and follow your own path, and everything will work itself out along the way. My second takeaway from my chat with Keith is that there is an incredible amount of opportunity out there for Youpers and the Upper Peninsula as a whole in the world of technology. You know, the foundation of this place that we call home was built on manufacturing and mining and timber. And all of those things are great, and they all still have their place. But the future is no longer something that we can talk about as if it will one day be here. It's already here. And technology is going to continue to play a bigger and bigger role in all aspects of our lives. We can either take a back seat and just kind of go along for the ride, or we can step up to the plate and embrace what really could be a huge positive game changer for this entire region. And it's Keith and people like him that are on the front lines right now, and they're waving the flag. And it's up to the rest of us to listen to them with an open mind and to truly learn from them. Because that's where real growth takes place. And in my personal opinion, I think that's what it's going to take to keep making the Upper Peninsula someplace special. Chat It Up is a bi-weekly podcast about all things Upper Peninsula of Michigan. Wherever you're listening, please subscribe, rate, and leave me a review. You can also find Chat It Up on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. Thank you for listening in. I'm your host, Shooter, reminding you to keep your chin up and your eyes forward.